योगेन चित्तस्य पदेन वाचां मलं शरीरस्य च वैद्यकेन योपाकरोत्तं प्रवरं मुनीनां पतञ्जलिं प्राञ्जलिरानतोऽस्मि आबाहु पुरुषाकारं शङ्खचक्रासिधारिणं सहस्रशिरसं श्वेतं प्रणमामि पतञ्जलिं हरिः ॐ वसुदेवसुतं देवं कंसचाणूरमर्दनं देवकी परमानन्दं कृष्णं वन्दे जगद्गुरुं सर्वोपनिषदो गावो दुग्धा गोपालनन्दनः पार्थो वत्सः सुधीर्भोक्ता दुग्धं गीतामृतं महत् ॐ शान्तिः शान्तिः शान्तिः। So in the Srimad Bhagavad Gita, also known as the Yoga Shastra, the teachings on yoga, especially the deeper teachings on yoga, we are studying the 4th chapter, and today we will study the 12th verse. We had completed the 11th one. It has been a few days since we had our previous class on the Gita. These two subjects that we discuss, twice the classes on Upanishads. Yesterday there was an Upanishad class. On next Saturday there will be an Upanishad class. Upanishads are the very foundation of the deeper yogic principles. For the first time in Indian history, when the deeper yogic principles were expressed in clear words, that was known as the Upanishads. Before that, the Vedas are extremely ambiguous and not really ambiguous, but are deeply symbolical, and therefore to understand them, a person first of all needs to have a clear understanding of the philosophical foundation and also some insight which comes when a person experiences himself. Then the most ancient Vedic statements start making sense. There is often, I think, some confusion you mentioned about the relationship between the Upanishads and the Vedas and the Bhagavad Gita. Chronologically, the Vedas, by which I mean the Vedic Samhitas, are the most ancient teachings, and the Upanishads, which are also known as Vedanta, which means the end of the Vedas and also the essence of the Vedas, the conclusion, because end also means the end, and also can mean conclusion. The word conclusion, essence, quintessence. So the quintessence of the Vedas is presented in the form of the Upanishads. They are still part of the Vedas, but just the latest part. If one takes up the book of the Vedas, usually most of the Upanishads would either be found at the very end or near to the end, as the very concluding remarks. On the other hand, the Bhagavad Gita, again, the Vedas are vast, even the Upanishads are vast. What the Bhagavad Gita tries to do is to present the quintessential teachings of the Upanishads. And therefore, in this prayer that I just recited, Sarvopanishado Gavaha, all Upanishads are like cows, Dogdha Gopalanandanaha, and Sri Krishna, the speaker, the orator of the Bhagavad Gita, is like a milkman. Partho Vatsaha, Arjuna, his student, his friend, his disciple, is like the calf, for which the cow gives the milk, and the milk, which means the very essence of that cow, is presented in the Bhagavad Gita. The very quintessence, the essence. And this is what makes the Bhagavad Gita, if understood correctly and if not presented like some commentators and some teachers sometimes do when they present it in a sectarian framework, then of course it seems limiting, but that limitation is the limitation of the commentator. If a person looks at the original text itself like the milk, that is the whole idea of this analogy, that cows can be of various colors. One cow would be white, the other one would be black. They can be of various colors, but when it comes to the milk, the quintessence, the essence is always of the same color. There is no difference in that. So that is what makes the Bhagavad Gita very universal, applicable to all the different philosophical understanding, and that is why it was respected. It is like the Vedas, like the Upanishads. Srimad Bhagavad Gita is again one of those texts that had a universal application in a diverse culture like India, where there are so many differences, so many philosophical differences, so tremendous difference in philosophical understanding. Yet Gita found an extremely wide audience across all these different philosophical traditions, because they could find something common, something fundamental in it, something foundational in it. So this fourth chapter that we are studying, which is known as Jnana Karma Sannyasa Yoga, Jnana, which means wisdom, insight, understanding, karma, action, and sannyasa, renunciation. These three things, insight, action, and renunciation, a discussion, this fourth chapter comprises of a discussion of these three aspects. Jnana, deeper insight, karma, action, and sannyasa, renunciation, as a method of developing yoga balance in one's life. So this is what the 4th chapter is about. The last shloka that we studied in our previous session clearly expresses the universal approach. That was the 11th shloka of the 4th chapter on page number 74. Ye yatha mam prapadyante tans tathaiva bhajamyaham. Clearly expresses the universal approach which Sri Krishna wants to convey through the Bhagavad Gita, because in this shloka he beautifully states that every path, from whatever direction a person may approach me, and by me he does not mean a particular person, but when Sri Krishna speaks of me, he does not mean what we understand by me. What we understand by me is our individual body, our individual mind, our individual thoughts, our individual emotions, our individual convictions, our limited individual personality, limited to this physical body. And when a master, when a Vedantic master, when a master of the Upanishads, who has gone deeper into what I really means, who has followed the path of self-analysis, who has frequently again and again asked this question, who am I? And has searched deeper within himself for an answer to this question, deeper within his body, deeper within his prana, deeper within his mind, which we discussed yesterday, deeper within his intellect, deeper even within what he understands himself to be, the limited concept of one's personality, which we call ego. Even as he enters deeper into that and reaches the entity which, like the ground, like the very foundation, supports all these, that consciousness, and yet is not limited by these limitations. So someone who starts identifying with that and has lost his identification with any other limited entity, the I of that person, the I of such a self-enlightened master, that is the I that Sri Krishna is speaking of. And that I, it would be the same if the Buddha uses the word I. It would be the same if any Upanishadic master, or for that matter, any master in the Mahabharata, because Srimad Bhagavad Gita is part of the Mahabharata, we see how various masters, even in the time of Sri Krishna, spoke of the I. They were not referring to their individual selves. Each one of them, whenever they were using the word I, they were using it for the same entity, for the same foundational principle, pure consciousness. That is what Krishna is referring to when he says that every path, in the last verse, Mama Vartmanu Vartante Manushyaha Partha Sarvashaha, all human beings, when they follow a path into this inner reality, they are following the path from whatever direction they come, Sarvashaha, from all sides, whatever direction they come. The ultimate goal is me, that pure consciousness which lies at the center of every individual. So this approach of the Bhagavad Gita, so when he speaks of my path, he means the path that leads to me. He means the path that leads to that inner consciousness. So this approach of the Gita, which is the same as we find in the Upanishads, which is exactly the same that we find in the Vedas as well, most probably expressed in the most ancient statement, Ekam Sat, pure existence is one, but Vipraha Bahudha Vadanti, the wise express it in various ways. So this acknowledgement of one supreme reality, and yet the allowance that it can be expressed in infinite ways, in endless ways, in many ways. This acceptance of plurality is what lies at the very foundation of the yogic teachings. And this spills further into the religious approach, at least when it comes to religion in India. The next shloka is a little bit about that, the next shloka that we are going to speak about. However, when I speak of religion, I must make it clear in the context in which religion came into existence in India. First of all, there are these deep mystical teachings which in their mystical heights cannot be limited to any sect or any tradition or any particular religious practice, but lie at the very foundation of all the practices. However,
can you give an example?
Sorry? Yes, I'm coming to the examples, yes. Two things that create a limitation on this path is the use of symbols. The moment we start using symbols, symbols have a form. And the moment we start using symbols, then one path might use a very different set of symbols and the other path might use a very different set of symbols. So when it comes in practical terms, when a person starts making use of symbols, differences become obvious, because a symbol of one particular tradition will be different from the symbols of the other tradition. Why do we need symbols? In the eight-limbed path of yoga, symbols are deeply essential in dharana. Dharana, which is the first state of meditation. Dharana, dhyana, samadhi. After a person has practiced asana, pranayama, pratyahara, when a person starts practicing attention, focusing the stream of thought on something which is tangible, then of course the choice of symbols is so vast, and it has inspired so many traditions in India that you would find atheistic traditions, you would find theistic traditions, you would find monotheistic traditions, you would find polytheistic traditions, and you would find pantheistic traditions, and most importantly even atheistic traditions who completely deny the existence of God, yet they too have developed a great array of symbology for the purpose of focus and attention. So when it comes to this use of symbols, then because we are making use of a form, limitations come. That is the first cause of limitation and differences. And as long as a person is aware and remains aware of the foundational similarity that underlies the difference of all these symbols, the difference does not create any problem. Because then the understanding is there that, okay, they are using that symbol and I'm using this symbol, but ultimately we are trying the same. So there is no clash, no problem. Till that foundation, and this is the work of the Vedas and the Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita, they make us aware again and again, because they don't speak in terms of those symbols, but they go beyond those symbols and speak in term of what underlies those symbols. The words that they would use, you would not find the word Shiva, Rama, Krishna, these words. You will not find them, for example, in the Upanishads, in the Vedas, not even in the Bhagavad Gita. But very universal terms like Brahman, which is defined as pure consciousness, Atman, self, Purusha, indwelling entity, Prakriti, nature, Hiranyagarbha, the golden womb, all such words are used, which are extremely universal and can be understood by different traditions according to their own understanding. So the first cause of difference is the practical use of symbols. And can a person get fully rid of symbols? Some traditions have. Some traditions have made an attempt, because when they saw that symbols always create divisions, then they tried to get rid of symbols, but the best they could really just get rid of human symbols, human-like symbols, but they could not get rid of symbols altogether. Every religion needs symbols. Every religion makes use of symbol. There is no exception to that. Whatever that symbol looks like, but there is something tangible, and the moment something tangible is there, then differences come. And if a person is not aware of the deeper similarities, then the problems arise. There have always been mystics in all religions who have had an insight into that underlying unity. And if we look at their teachings, for example, if you look at the teachings of the Sufi masters, Ibn Arabi in Islam, or the great Christian mystics such as Meister Eckhart, when we look at their teachings, we find that they have touched upon that underlying similarity, and therefore the external differences created by those symbols didn't matter anymore to them. So this is one thing that creates divisions, that creates differences. The other thing is when a person starts explaining into words, formalizes an idea in words, in terms, then the choice of words, the method of expressing it in words, starts creating a difference. So for example, the choice of the Upanishadic masters is Sat, pure existence. Now, the choice of the Buddha is very different. He prefers to use the word Shunya, which is the complete negation of everything. If you go deeper into the experiential aspect of the Buddha's Shunya and the Sat or Brahman of the Upanishads and the way they eventually expressed it, it's completely the same thing. You don't see any difference. But when it comes to the philosophical formulation, then the Shunyavada of Nagarjuna, and this is not Buddha, this is the great philosopher Nagarjuna, 5th century or 4th century great philosopher Nagarjuna, who formulated the whole system of Shunyavada, which is now taught, for example, at most of the Buddhist, Tibetan Buddhist monasteries. That text Shunyavada is a completely different philosophical formulation than that of Advaita Vedanta, non-dualist Vedanta of Shankaracharya, 8th century great Indian Vedantic thinker. Both of them were Indians. But when it comes to that philosophical approach, when it comes to that philosophical explanation, again in philosophy, tremendous differences arise. Yet, again the Upanishads come to our rescue, and they say that the first thing is to listen. The second thing is to make sense of the teachings logically, using the mind in a logical way. That is what a philosopher does. The third thing is, and the last thing and the most important thing, is to actually experience it in one's life. And again, when it comes to that third level, philosophical differences just become differences in words, in expressions, in the way things have been presented, in the way the bits and pieces of reality, of the inner reality, have been presented to the listeners. Because the moment a word is simply like a hole through which a person can have an insight into something that is infinite. But the insight that a person gets through that word will be limited by that verbal concept. There is no other way. Then initially, yes, the final transmission occurs in complete silence, but initially transmission has to occur through words. There is no other way. That's how the masters express what they have experienced. So again, here also, a person, if an individual becomes aware of the underlying unity between these various philosophical concepts, and therefore does not get deluded by the differences, then again there is no problem. But yes, if it remains superficial, until it remains superficial, problems come. Particularly if a person becomes extremely narrow-minded and thinks that this is all that there is. But again, the purpose of the Upanishads, the purpose of the Vedas, the purpose of the Gita is to make us aware of that underlying similarities, underlying oneness that is there. In that sense, the Bhagavad Gita is meaningful. And therefore, this statement that Shri Krishna said, Mama Vartmanu Vartante Manushyaha Partha Sarvashaha, from all sides men follow my path in every way, which means the path that leads to me, the indwelling entity. And he himself, in the 9th chapter, he will say that some people worship that indwelling entity as many, bahudha. He uses the word bahudha, as many. That by that we can understand polytheism, or even what Western thinkers have called henotheism, in which a person just worships their own tribal one god. It's worshipping many, but worshipping many ultimately, in Krishna's understanding, even those who are worshipping many, in all those forms they are ultimately worshipping the same indwelling consciousness that manifests in the form of all those forms. They just have not developed to that level of understanding. When they will go deeper, when they will think more, they will realize it. So therefore, mostly tribal cultures, they worship many. Then the second step, he says, prithakttvena. First of all, bahudha, then prithakttvena. Prithakttvena is to worship something that is one but different from oneself. That is that transcendent personal God of, for example, monotheism. In the mystical Vedantic understanding, initially to develop a relationship of devotion and love, we need two. We need a sense of duality. And therefore, that sense of duality that is there is meaningful, is fully accepted in the understanding of Vedanta. But again, when a person goes deeper into that and reaches the mystical heights, then comes the third step, which Krishna says he meditates upon it as one in the sense as one and one with his own self, completely indifferent from his own self, in which that pure consciousness is seen as everything, and as also, therefore, because it is everything, it is also my own self. It is completely indifferent from my essential nature. So this is what the mystics, the mystical understanding does, and as a person goes deeper, everything else gets accommodated. Therefore, a mystic beautifully can accommodate also the monotheistic understanding by giving it due respect, and also the polytheistic understanding, and even atheistic understanding. There is no problem at all there as well. So this is the tapestry, this is the rich tapestry behind which the religious approaches, the various religious approaches have developed in India, of which there are 7 major ones, which I should say, with including the modern one, 8. So the first one, and most probably the most ancient one, is the worship of Shiva, at least in India. Then with that, the worship of, the second one, the worship of Shakti, energy aspect of Shiva. Shiva is the consciousness aspect, and Shakti is the energy aspect. Shiva and Shakti. The third one is Vishnu, the Vaishnava tradition, Shaiva tradition, Shakta tradition, and then the Vaishnava tradition, the traditions which worship Vishnu. The fourth one is the Ganesha's tradition, known as the Ganapatyas, who worship Ganesha as a symbol to the supreme divinity. Each one of these, this tradition would worship Shiva as a symbol to the supreme divinity. This tradition would worship Shakti or its various manifestations as a form of the supreme divinity. This one, the Vishnu, and the fourth one, Ganesha. For them, Ganesha would be the manifestation of the supreme divinity. And then the fifth one is Surya, the traditions which I think came from particularly from Iran, which worship the sun as a manifestation of that supreme divinity, the Saura traditions. The last 2 traditions have now basically got mixed in the other 3, so only 3 can be recognized distinctively. These 2 have been mixed into the rest 3. These are what are categorized today as the 5 orthodox traditions, and the other 2 which are equally were originally equally included into the way we studied philosophy, culture, traditions. They included the Jaina approach, the approach of Jainism, and the approach of Buddhism. These 2 traditions also make use of a great array of symbols. Some of these symbols have been taken from the Vedic traditions. They have developed their own symbols. There has been a lot of interaction between these traditions. And the most beautiful thing was that till this awareness of the inherent unity was there, in India, they were working together. They were practicing together. They were living together, sharing the same sites. If you go to Ellora and Ajanta, these caves, wherever we go, we find most of the ancient sites. They are shared by all of them. Most of these ancient sites are holy. So these are the 7, and the 8th one I would include Sikhism as well, which is a modern development. It came into existence in the 15th century. But if we look at their teachings of Guru Granth Sahib, it is nothing but it is just presenting once again the quintessence of the Upanishads and getting rid of all the differences created by symbols and forgetting that universal unity, once again making aware humanity of that universal inherent unity. This is what the Sikh masters originally tried to do in India. And the beautiful thing was that each one of these masters, may it be, particularly if we are talking about Buddha and the Sikh masters, most of them were not even interested in creating a new religion or creating a new tradition. They were just making an attempt to make aware the common people of the inherent, basic, fundamental unity. And therefore the teachings of the Sikh masters is nothing but presented pure Advaita Vedanta, non-dualistic Vedanta of the Upanishads and nothing else. Nothing else. The difference that is there is again just in their rituals, in their symbols, and in their temples. That's all. Again, the inherent teachings is exactly the same. So, this is how religion developed in India to have a wider perspective. Now, what happens that within all these religions there are particular rituals, and rituals are easy to perform. Usually people come to these rituals with particular desires. Most of the common people, they come to these rituals with particular desires. It exists in every religion. Even in Buddhism, in every religion, they have a particular desire. They come to the temple, they pray, they perform particular rituals, and in response to that, they would like their desires to get fulfilled. And it is basically their own faith, their own deep conviction in that, which then allows. And if it is a noble desire, if it is a good desire, then it is mostly granted by the universe. Shri Krishna in this speaks now in the next shloka, he speaks about these type of people who come to religion simply with a particular desire and remain on that level. He's speaking about that so that he can lead the discussion deeper than that. Because later on he will speak about 4 types of devotees, and this is not peculiar to any particular religion. It exists in all religions. One is Artha, someone who, because of suffering, comes for healing and just wants healing. Actually, the first one is Artharthi, someone who is desirous of fulfilling some of their desires. They have a particular desire and they come to the divine to fulfill those desires. That is the first one. The second one is the one who comes for healing, who has particular internal problems, internal confusions, internal suffering, and he cannot find a way to come to go out of it, to get out of it. So he prays to the universe to help him to get out of it. That is the second type. The third one, which is the rare ones, which are the rare ones, are the ones that come to understand it. They want to understand it. They want to go deeper into it. They want to understand what it really is. They want to make sense of it. They are the jijyasu, the ones that question it, the ones that say, Athato Brahma Jijyasa, now it's time to make an inquiry into this consciousness. Enough of all these rituals which we performed without understanding. Now let us make an attempt to make sense of it and then experience it. So that is the third category. And the fourth category is jnani, someone who has experienced it and prays, worships, meditates, not for something, not for any reason, but because it has become his very nature. This is what he does. This is what he is. This is the only thing that he can do and nothing else. This is what happens with him naturally. This is the fourth state, jnani. So yes, Shri Krishna does not say that any one of them is lesser or greater. He says each one of them are extremely noble. They are in the process of evolution. But when it comes to the wise one, who does it with complete understanding, who does it for no reason at all, who does it because it has become their very nature, he is my very self. He and I, we are one and the same. There is no difference. There is no difference between anybody, but the ignorance is what creates the limitation. And there, even that seeming limitation, that seemingly present wall has blown away, is no more there. That is the most beautiful thing. So in this chapter, Shri Krishna is basically taking us towards that, So let us pronounce the shloka. First of all, each word one by one. Kankshantaha. Kankshantaha. It's the 12th one of the 4th chapter. Yes. Kankshantaha. 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 Karmanam. 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 Siddhim. 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 Yajanta. 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 Iha. 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 Devataha. 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 Kshipram hi. Kshipram hi. Kshipram hi. Manushe. 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 Loke. 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 Siddhir. 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 Bhavati. 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 Karmaja. 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 Kankshantah karmanam siddhim yajanta iha devataah kshipram himanushe loke siddhir bhavati karmaja. Kankshantah karmanam siddhim. Those who are desirous of the fruits of their actions and therefore are not desirous of freedom from their limitations and ignorance and its means, which is purification of the heart, which is achieved through performing action without a desire for its fruits, as explained repeatedly in the 3rd chapter, but who are desirous of their fruits of actions. They perform here on this level of existence, which means on this earth. They offer yajante, they offer sacrifices to devataha, to devas, to radiant manifestations. Deva means radiant, a radiant manifestation, which they perceive as different from themselves. When Shri Krishna uses the word anya devataha means to other gods. He simply means as entities which are perceived as different from oneself, as something that is other. Because in the Upanishadic understanding, when a person goes deeper, then somewhere the shift from that other to the indifferent one has to occur for the meditation to go really deeper. And the Upanishads are very clear about that. Athayonyam devatam upaste, till a person keeps on meditating and worshipping something that is different from themselves. Athayonyam devatam upaste anyosau anyo ahamasmiti, thinking that the object of my veneration is different from myself. Nasaveda, he will never become aware of the entity, because understanding can come of it as it exists at the very core of one's mind and one's intellect. When a person goes deeper into one's mind, when a person goes deeper into one's intellect, into these faculties of understanding, and experience it there where the deepest insight takes place. And that cannot take place till an understanding of difference is there. Till an understanding of difference is there, what will happen is yatha pashurevam sadevanam. That individual just remains like an animal of those radiant beings. And this is in a very, not really, I mean, the idea of being an animal, it's rather, for them it's a good thing, because to be the sheep of God, to be completely subservient to something different from yourself, and to be, yes, that is how they perceive it, that is how they understand it, but that is what they will remain. They will never experience the unity, the oneness that a mystic can experience. For that, they would have to transcend that notion of separation. That is where ultimately the Upanishadic teachings lead. So, Kankshantah karmanam siddhim yajanta iha devataha kshipram himanushe loke. On this human level of existence, siddhir bhavati karmaja, the attainment that is acquired through works is very quick and very fast. On the other hand, a person who is not a human being, who is not yet fully prepared, the results of meditation, the results of knowledge and wisdom take time to manifest. They require a lot of internal preparation. They require a lot of internal purification. So they take time. But the result of action, the result of work is very quick. And therefore, they remain attached to rituals. Because Kshipram himanushe loke siddhir bhavati karmaja. Yes, the result, the attainments that a person acquires as a result of one's actions is fast. And the same is true even about yoga, about the practice of yoga. Yes, as long as our practice remains completely physical, and the purpose is something physical, the attainment is very fast. I mean, a person doesn't need to do much. Just practice for a while, get that elasticity, and some sort of name, wealth starts to come into the picture. So if that is the purpose, if that is all what we want by our yoga practice, so that we can teach it and we can make a living out of it, the results, there is little effort and the results also come fast. But if a person practices it for something deeper, as a means of pressing deeper into one's essential nature, gaining an insight into one's essential nature, that requires a lot of work. That requires a lot of deeper understanding. That requires a lot of effort. And there, neither the work is easy, nor the result is easily accessible, but a person really has to make it their life. Everything that they do needs to be related to that. Only then a person can use it to go deeper within themselves. This is where Shri Krishna is trying to lead. Nonetheless, again this shloka connects actually to what Shri Krishna said in the previous shloka. Still, these people are following the same path that ultimately leads to me. They might get stuck at some point if they don't make an effort to go deeper. And it might take, in the understanding in the Indian understanding, it might take another few births till such purification occurs, such understanding occurs. But still, they are on the same path. So it is the same thing about our practice of yoga as well. At least we are on the path, hoping that some deeper understanding will come when we will make an effort, when the desire, when the need arises from within. So, still, if there are any questions, yes.
Because you said Sikhism came in the 15th century.
Yes.
So what about Gurumukhi, their language?
About the language, because language is something that, first of all, Gurumukhi is the language of a particular region of India, which I think existed even earlier, because Guru Nanak Dev Ji spoke in Gurumukhi. So because he spoke in Gurumukhi, so the language was already existing at that time. Gurumukhi is a script. And when we look at the script is very similar to the Kashmiri script. So again, the script has its deeper origins. The language of most of the Guru Granth Sahib is not actually Punjabi, is not actually Gurumukhi, it is Braj Bhasha.
Oh.
Yes. Most of the, I should say, even though of course Guru Granth Sahib has also Persian in it, it has Sanskrit in it, it has a lot of Urdu in it, and yes, it has a lot of Punjabi in it, Gurumukhi. Because Gurumukhi is just the script, but when we speak of the language, then it is Punjabi language. So there is a lot of Punjabi language in it, particularly the first earlier masters of Sikhism, they spoke in Punjabi. But around the 4th or the 5th master of Sikhism, they all shifted to Braj Bhasha, which was the classical, poetical language of India in those days. Yes, so most of the Shabads, most of the Kirtans in Gurumukhi, they are actually in Braj Bhasha language, which is the same language of Surdas, which is the same language of all the great poets of India. So they are using exactly the same language. So even the language is not different. Yet now this understanding, this is completely political, and it came only after India became independent, and the real rift came after what Indira Gandhi did with the Golden Temple, invaded it, and with that really the rift came, and now they want to identify themselves as a completely different religion, and the rift came, and consequently also Hindus have started seeing them as a different religion, yet I cannot see anything different in them other than just particular rituals, which their marriages are differently, these rituals are different, that's all. And yes, they wouldn't have statues, they rather have their Guru Granth Sahib which they worship. So their temples are different, but otherwise there is no difference at all.
When you were 3 years old, then it was the time when I wanted to learn Sanskrit. And we were on a food journey, and there was a Gurukula. And even at that time it was very difficult that a woman can learn Sanskrit. There was nobody ready to teach me. So, but then somewhere in Narora, Bulandshahr, there was Gurukula, and that principal of the Gurukula said he will teach me a little. And so the first thing what I had to learn were these Niti Slokas. There were 10 Niti Slokas. Niti means
good teachings.
Good teachings.
Yeah, just
so
noble teachings.
Sloka was that India is like a huge umbrella where all the religions take shelter under it.
Yeah.
Can you imagine how beautiful?
Yeah.
And now nobody talks about this anymore. Everybody gets divided and they are fighting
Yeah.
and doing. But at that time that was really
the moment you start using religion to support your political ambitions, the whole purpose is then it's gone. Then it's finished. Then it is of no use anymore. Then it's fit to be thrown away, I tell you. Yes. Yes. First of all, I didn't mention it because I have very little knowledge of it. Islam and Christianity are rather better known to me because they are very much a part of the dialogue in India, so I have looked into it. Kabbalah has attracted me a little bit, but I have not yet got the chance of exploring it further, which I would like to do at some point. What you have mentioned, I think it is the same in Islam. also because in Islam also there is no acceptance of worshipping statues, and in Christianity, of course, to some extent it is also the same thing. I must say that even within Hinduism there are distinctively two traditions. One is Arya Samaj, which completely rejects the worship of statues, which completely rejects the worship of any form, statue. Arya Samaj, there is a tradition. This came into existence in the 18th century. And then there was another 15th century tradition which is widely known not in other parts of India but is very influential in Assam, which is in the northeast, known as Shankara Deva, who even had inspired his own style of dance, the Satriya dance, who was a great Krishna devotee but completely rejected worshipping statues. So apart from that, in the Indian culture, this question whether one should worship, one should make use of forms or not, this has been a very ancient question, which has been asked very clearly, for example, in the 6th century BC in Maharshi Yaska's writing, and his conclusion is that we find both types of statements in the Vedic teachings. Sometimes we find anthropomorphical statements in which God's face, the face or the particular limbs are referred to, and then there are statements which completely emphasize the formlessness. Because both types of statements are found, and because forms ultimately are just being used as a symbol, so there should be no problem. So both ideas, if somebody wants to reject it altogether or somebody wants to accept it as a means for a while and then go into the formless, eventually there should be no problem at all. So this is the answer that we get in Maharshi Yaska's writing Nirukta, which is one of the 6 limbs of the Vedas and was studied traditionally by all the Vedic scholars, and therefore was a deeply influential text. And therefore this confusion in India whether a person should worship statues or not. Rather, this understanding was there that on initial levels, when a person starts practicing meditation, some of them require statues. If they don't want it, fine. If they want it, fine. Both is fine. Ultimately, both of them have to lead to the same formless state. So therefore, that acceptance has remained here, and it was never a cause of confusion. When a person realizes that forms are actually limitations, forms are actually dividing, so therefore a person has to go deeper than these forms. But it was not deemed necessary to actually go out and have military expeditions and do that literally out there. It is a meditative thing that a person within himself, not out there. So that is how it is in the Indian context, at least.
But one thing was sure, with all this lot of variety, people used to live together in peace.
Yes.
Muslims were living together with Hindus, Hindus with Muslims.
As long as politics did not come into the picture.
So they were all together.
There was no problem at all.
Nothing different. We could go in a family very easy, or in Kashmir, a sadhu could go to a Muslim family to get something to eat.
Yes.
So it was all.
Oh my God! When you come to Kashmir, Kashmir has inspired this what they call the Rishi tradition of Islam, Sufi Islam, which is the only real Indian Sufi Islam, because all other Sufi Islams that came to India came from somewhere outside. And if you look at the teachings of these Sufi mystics, which were at one point the most influential masters in Kashmiri traditions, they are so universal and so beautiful in their teachings. And it is today the same country where, thanks to Aurangzeb in the 16th century, 17th century, this political problem came into existence, and it has just become worse and worse and worse and worse. And there is no solution in sight. As to me, the only solution seems that to go back to those teachings, but then who will do that? To go to the very foundation and see the oneness and the similarity, because ultimately all these Kashmiri Muslims earlier, they just used to be scholars in Kashmir. Kashmir used to be the head of India, and these are all scholars who were converted. Most of them were converted by Aurangzeb under force, and now the blood is the same, the relationship, they are brethren, they are the same people, same. Everything is the same, and yet they cannot coexist together, unfortunately. But if you look at the original Kashmiri teachings, they are amazingly, amazingly beautiful. They were deeply inspired by Kashmir Shaivism. Lal Ded, one of the greatest female mystics of Kashmir, she is the one who gave her own milk to Nasiruddin Wali, the first master of the Rishi Sufi Islam tradition, and because he would not drink the milk of his mother, so she went, and he would have died. So then she went to him and she said, why you are afraid of drinking it? Drink it. And then she gave her own milk to him, and he became later on, when he grew up, he became a great mystic, and he inspired what is known as the original Kashmiri Sufi Islam, which was highly influential and inspired a tradition of Sufi masters who deeply adhered to these universal principles. And yet, around the 17th century, everything was destroyed. It continued till the late 19th century. There were one or two people out there who people started forgetting everything. And now it's just some people do their thesis, MA, PhDs on this subject. That's all. Nobody speaks of it. Yes?
Can you develop a little more this idea about similarities between the atheistic and the theistic visions of finding?
Yes. Yoga from the very beginning had two approaches. Because yoga, earlier even when the word yoga was not used distinctively, the word that was used was Sankhya. Sankhya, which means knowledge, deep wisdom. And from very antiquity, there have been these two traditions. There was one tradition which completely negated the necessity of a creator, of something that other traditions called Ishvara, which is translated as God, as a ruler. Ishvara, as a ruler of this universe. For them, yes, karma was acceptable to everybody. Everybody accepted it. But for many of them, karma was enough. We do a good karma and we get a good result. We do a bad karma, we do a bad result. And everything propagates accordingly. There is no need of a transcendental personality, a personal God. That was one doctrine that was known as Nirishwara Sankhya, atheistic Sankhya. And then there was Seshwara Sankhya, theistic Sankhya. Buddhism in particular, which is quite agnostic in its approach, does not speak of God, does not clearly negate it as well, but Buddha simply did not speak of God. And most of the Buddhist traditions, they have actually negated the idea completely, if not Buddha himself, but the Buddhistic masters have completely. So that comes, we have to remember that the Buddha was born in a city. He was the prince of Kapilavastu, which was originally thought to have been built by students of Kapila. So somehow that stream was there, which got further developed in India in the form of Buddhism, And on the other hand, the Seshwara Sankhya stream, the theistic Sankhya stream, got further developed in the form of Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. So that is how I see Buddhism and Patanjali's yoga having a common origin ultimately. Because again in Patanjali's yoga, Patanjali says, Atha Yoga Anushasanam, I'm just re-teaching the teachings which were taught to me. So who was the original master? Ask any traditional commentator, he would say Kapila. Kapila is the first master. So, and then, yes, then there were also these wandering ascetics which were extremely ancient. They did not want to be part of any one of these. And I think, again, I must confess that my understanding, I have only looked into the yoga aspect of Jainism, which is by Haribhadra Suri. But otherwise, Jainism itself has extremely ancient roots in India, extremely ancient. Their 24th master, their last master, was already living at the time of the Buddha. So you can believe how ancient it is. So that was again a strand which the way I understand it, and I know it, you can maybe correct me, there is a complete negation of the idea of God. And yet, it is a religion, it is a fully practiced, it has temples, but with a very different kind of understanding. So, even the idea of, therefore, the definition of Nastika, we don't create these divisions between theism and atheism in Indian philosophy. Because even within, now forget about those atheistic traditions, even within the orthodox Vedic traditions, there are 6 philosophies, and out of these 3 are atheistic and only 3 are theistic. So even within Vedic traditions, atheism continued in the form of Vaisheshika, the atomistic doctrines, in the form of Nirishwara Sankhya, the atheistic Sankhya, it continued, and in the form of Mimamsaka, the Mimamsaka doctrine. It continued till the 10th century, 11th century. Till then, they ceased to exist as individual traditions. However, we still study them. We still study their teachings. That is part of when we study Vedanta, because for the discussions that were being held with them, we have to understand them as well. And so there has always been a dialogue, constant dialogue within Vedanta with all these different outlooks, trying to accept what is meaningful, what is understandable, and trying to reject what doesn't make sense. And this is how the traditions have evolved. If you keep politics out of picture. And that is how it was in India, because most of the times, at least the saints, the masters, they were always, by their traditions, they were inspired to keep away from the courts, from the kings. If the kings wanted to come to listen to them, fine, they welcomed them, but they would never go to them. They would never strive for political influence. This was considered something very, very bad. So for example, when Shankaracharya in the 8th century undertook this great revolution, when kings came to him and offered their chariots and said, okay, if you want to travel throughout India, use my chariots. He said, I'm a mendicant, I'm a beggar, let me remain a beggar. I don't want to make use of these. These are fit for you, not for me. I have to work with the people of the grassroots level. Your things are of no use for me. So this is what we see with Surdas, with Mirabai, with all these great masters. When they were invited by the great kings, they would say, if they want to come, let them come. I have nothing to seek from them. There is no purpose for me to go to them. But the moment this thing changes, and the religious masters start running after those in power and start to please them then
Is there no infighting between these different six philosophical schools?
there was a lot of discussion,
Because I mean,
there was a
some
lot
are
of
kind
debate.
like dualists, others are not.
Yes.
So do they fight with each other and then?
There was no military fight. There were debates, there were discussions, they were sitting together, they were having what they called, the word that was used was shastrartha. Shastrartha was the Sanskrit word for debate, which was reaching the real meaning of the scripture in question, of the teachings, not scripture, but just teachings. Deciding the real meaning of the teachings. So they would sit together, they would discuss.
So kind of the same structure as like the Plato's dialogues or something like that?
Yes, more of that kind. Like Plato's discussions. Like Plato's discussion.
Everyone has kind of different opinions.
Yes, and these different opinions are discussed, these different opinions are approached. You are encouraged to study all those different opinions first and then come back to the discussion. That is how it works. So the discussions are always kept open.
So those were kind of always open?
Yes. And as I said, they literally shared the same spaces, and they had to, for these discussions to take place, they would have to go to the Ellora Ajanta caves, go to the Saraswati temple in Kashmir, which is now in POK, in Pakistan occupied Kashmir. All these great centers of learning were shared in most cases by all the different traditions. And they were never the monopoly of one particular tradition. Yes. Okay, so let us leave it here. We conclude with the universal prayer of well-being. सर्वे भवन्तु सुखिनः सर्वे सन्तु निरामयाः सर्वे भद्राणि पश्यन्तु मा कश्चित् दुःखभाग् भवेत् ॐ शान्तिः शान्तिः शान्तिः